Greetings and salutations. You are listening to the Into North podcast, where we take a look at the competitive side of the Commander format, also known as CDH. I'm one of your hosts, Lyndon, aka Noobzors, and today I'm joined by my co-hosts, Matt, aka Null.
Yo.
Reed, aka Sick Robot.
What's up?
And Morgan, aka Spleenface.
How's it going?
And in this episode, we will be covering tournament prep for CDH tournaments. Yeah, but before we get into that, what have you guys been up to since the last episode?
Dude, in regards to housekeeping, I've literally been painting a new apartment. Actual housekeeping.
Hype.
Yeah, and finding all sorts of fun stuff behind the appliances. You know?
Hopefully nothing mummified.
Nothing. Yeah.
Hopefully nothing
but...
alive or dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing
Once
that
alive.
that is animate or at one point was animate.
Yeah. So far we dodged those bullets. But we did come back one day randomly and like the glass front of the oven had fallen off. Or partially fallen off.
Fun.
That's
Yikes.
That's
We
safe.
negotiated. No, not it turns into a win because we ended up essentially asking for new appliances and we're gonna get those. So.
Oh, nice.
hot.
What about you guys, Reed, Morgan?
I've been dying to ad nauseam publicly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty funny to watch, to be honest.
Yeah.
My arena ladder reset, and I got I finished. I ended up camping my top. So I think I ended up getting to like rank 40 mythic, and then I just camped it basically till the end of the season. So then I ended up finishing at like 150. So then I've got an invite to the mythic qualifier, whatever the heck that thing is. So that's gonna be I think it's on like the next weekend or something, I think. So yeah, I'll hopefully be playing in that, but I'm pretty sure the event is call time sealed, which, you know, I'm not excited for. I don't like sealed. Is you just get so much less control over your outcome. And so you can't like metagame you can't pick like the best anti-meta deck or, you know, the best deck that you're comfortable. It's like you just open what you open and, you know, pray that it's good enough. So, yeah, well, we'll see how that goes.
Are you allowed to have the entire Gitrog server yelling in your ear?
Yeah, probably.
Probably not.
That's probably what's going to happen. I'm probably going
certainly not
to
allowed
stream
to
the
do
entire
that.
event. What?
I mean,
There's no way. Like, that's outside assistance, right?
Is that? I don't know the rules of the thing.
Yeah,
so
You
I'll
should
see.
probably check the
Who's
rules.
asking?
Yeah.
Are you a judge?
in fact,
Yes,
that's
you are.
very relevant to what
None of you
have to do.
none of you listeners better rat on me, okay?
You have to tell me if you're a judge.
Yeah. Well, we'll release this episode after Lyndon received his prizes.
Yeah.
Lyndon is actually just violating like all the rules that we're about to go over.
No podcasting about the event.
Yeah.
Morgan, anything from you?
Not really, to be honest.
Okay then. Well, without further ado, let's jump into
Saving
housekeeping.
it.
And housekeeping today, we've got a new patron. Who this one has been a long time coming because he should have been a patron months and months and months ago, and that's Jordan. So he has become a new patron after losing a bet to me. Like, I don't even remember how many months
More than
ago.
half
We
a
showed
year
it up. We
ago.
called him out on the podcast. But you know what? He's
Multiple
finally
times, in fact.
he's finally a man of his word. So you know what? Good for you, Jordan. Thanks for becoming a patron.
Of course.
You rock.
You rock.
Cool. New developments. Morgan, the floor is
Oh
yours.
yeah, I just get to flex a little bit. At the last Tier 1 Con tournament, I catapulted myself to the head of the most influential Gitrog pilot of the decade rankings. By
Oh, wow.
I posted a poll and said what deck should I play, and then the Frog server brigaded it, and so I wound up playing Gitrog and took it to second place, and got to watch Reed die to his Atnaz.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which of those was the highlight, to be honest.
Right on.
Notably,
I'm a fan of Gitrog performing well. How did you
mean-
find it in the tournament overall? Is it as bad as you claim it is all the time?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Like,
It was just that
Basi-
everybody else was playing worse decks.
yeah,
than Gitrog.
basically, I either won very early with minimal interaction, or like won off the back of like very obvious play mistakes from my opponents, and those were the two outcomes. Like of
Dude, we
my
take
wins.
those.
Like there
Yeah.
were not. It was
A
not.
win is a win.
I mean, yeah, a win is a win, but certainly I didn't feel like I was winning because my deck was like doing things that other decks couldn't, or like was giving me a lot of opportunities.
I suppose the important thing is that your deck didn't prevent you from doing any
Sure,
of those
That's,
things.
yeah,
that's
but,
an
like-
incredibly low bar.
Yeah, that's not really really much of a qualifier. But yeah, it's and then I guess in the finals pod, it definitely felt like when I was playing against people who had been playing well that day and were on every
Real deck.
single. Yeah, it was just like a bunch of like 3+ color decks. Often, I mean, I guess there was one. There was the Thrasios Rograk Poly Tyrant deck,
Which
but
is
then there
still
were
a
two.
sick deck, by the way.
Then there were two Sans White like Nas console whatever decks, and definitely did not feel good in that pod.
Yep, I know those. I know those feelings. You just feel powerless to do anything against Consult or Adnos decks in your Golgari deck.
Yeah, there was a point. There was like a giant counter war being fought with like Rhystic Studies and Mystic Remoras. I just took out one of my like blank tokens that I think I just wrote Golgari LOL and just put it out.
The classic.
And you're there for
Yeah, so,
moral
like-
support. Yeah.
They cast this as Swan Song, Dispel, Deflecting. So I'm like, yeah, you guys have fun.
Cool. So into the main topic of the show, which, as I stated before, is tournament prep / CDH tournaments. Okay. First thing we've got to discuss, we've kind of broken it down into categories. We've got deck choice, card choice, evaluating the current meta and whatever the meta is going to be for the tournament, things to do on the day of the tournament, and then some one-off tips. So yeah, kind of guiding you through the process in roughly chronological order. Cool. So
yeah.
first things first, deck choice. Reed, do you wanna? This is your point,
Yeah.
right?
So this is the big one. Well, okay. So I feel like we should talk about deck choice in the more general sense first, because there's a certain there is a certain choice that you have to make when picking a deck for a tournament. I have to word this very carefully.
Don't leave it up to a poll.
Yeah, so first of all, leaving it up to a vote is not an option. Never do that. The second thing is that there are two options. One is you play the good deck, or the second option is you play the deck that you're the most comfortable with. And or the deck that you like the most. Depending on how you view it. So really it's whether or not you are comfortable in your ability to play the best deck in the format, or what you perceive as the best deck in the format, or whether you just want to play the deck that you're the most comfortable with that you think can do okay.
So some important things to realize is like the people who can really play any deck and the kinds of people who play the best decks in the format are usually and they're successful doing that are like pro players. People who can play any deck, right? But even what's kind of important to notice is that even among pro
honestly,
players, there are people who still play decks that they've have a ton of experience with,
Yeah.
right? So I think like Reed Duke, obviously notorious Jund player, and there's lots of people who comfortable with very specific archetypes, and they'll always take those to tournaments. So having a lot of reps with the deck and being extremely comfortable with it will take you a long way. And even if you're really skilled, it it's hard to immediately just want to be like, well, I think, Drastios Timna X is the, whatever consult CST mid range is the best deck in the format. I'm just going to take this deck with 0 experience. Even if you're completely correct that it's the best deck and, it's the most well suited for the tournament, the lack of experience can set you back quite a lot.
Yeah, you need to be able to play with it. And, like, the whole thing is, like, yeah, typically the people who, like, just pick up whatever the best deck is currently, or whatever they perceive as the best deck currently, are typically people with, like, a breadth of experience playing a lot of different styles of decks, and generally, like, have the fundamentals to pick that up, whereas, like, that may not be the case if you've dedicated a lot of your time to a specific strategy, and it may just be a better idea to stick with that strategy.
Yeah, that being said, like, I think it's probably not a bad idea to, like, try, especially because for CDH, because, like, a lot of the tournaments, the deck registration is, like, very 11th hour. So if it's weeks out from a tournament and you think, okay, I think, Grixis consultation, Nas, whatever, is the best thing to be doing, but that's not what I'm comfortable with. I play Urza. You could certainly, like, just try and get a few reps in with a Grixis deck, and, like, if you do wind up taking it, then that's good because you have some real practice, and you have learned stuff about it. Or you might just learn, like, okay, I'm very unfamiliar with this deck. I don't feel like I know what I'm supposed to be doing in given game states. So, like, maybe, I should just stick with what I know. So, like, definitely, this isn't an evaluation that you have to make purely sort of, like, idealistically. You can try the deck that you're thinking about switching to in a non-tournament setting and see how you feel. And I would encourage doing that.
And also just because that helps you, it helps you just, like, gain a better understanding of how decks work, and just, like, playing a variety of the meta decks, or the decks that have high representation, just give you a better idea of also how to play against them, and gives you more insight into how to play the decks that you already know, all that good stuff. So I definitely agree with Morgan here, and encourage playing a lot of different strategies in, like, no stakes situations just to gain experience, and then, like, if you happen to like them, great, bring it to your tournament.
The one thing I think that it's important, so it's really important to pick a deck that you're comfortable with, kind of, that's best case scenario. Now, if your deck I think that's a good rule of thumb if the deck is either well positioned or kind of neutrally positioned. If the deck that you're comfortable with is actively in a bad position in kind of the overall meta, like a good example would be if you're not playing Hulk into the Hulk meta, where everyone is on Grafdigger's Cages, Rest in Peace, these kinds of hate pieces. If you're playing some non-Hulk deck that can't
be a Grafdigger's Cage,
like, you're not built on that, like, speed and resiliency of Hulk decks. If you're playing something like a grindy Marin deck, like, you're in for a very bad time, even if you've got lots of reps. So that's a kind of situation where you might want to look at switching a deck. And as Morgan Reed was saying, the earlier you can kind of recognize that and start getting in reps, the better. Cool. I think we've got some other points here for deck choices. We've got strategy, win cons, and commanders. So that was kind of a more broad overview on selecting a deck.
And sort of what goes into when you're picking a deck. So, like, say you're not just going to go with your most comfortable thing. You maybe want to build a deck from the ground up. You're looking for a deck. If you're on more of a deep level, if you're not just looking for, like, the best deck in the format to bring to a thing, but maybe you're looking for what you might consider to be the best position deck to bring to a tournament, sort of like the three categories that you'd be looking at would be strategy, win cons, and commanders for sort of piecing together a deck to bring to a tourney, where you're sort of looking for a strategy that you think does well into your perceived idea of what the meta is going to look like, win cons that do well and sort of match that strategy, and then commanders to helm all of it and that you also think will do pretty well. or either do that or shore up weaknesses in your strategy and win cons areas.
Yeah,
And honestly, I think strategy we'll talk about it a lot in our next sections, because I think it does kind of come down to specific card choices and the meta, certainly, in the end.
Yeah. So I think that's probably good for deck choices for now. The whole deck choices section is going to be informed by a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about in card choices, which are our next section. But
And
before we
also
get
the
into that,
relevant meta stuff, but yeah.
true. Before we get into that, I kind of realized that we should probably give some of our credentials on why people should even listen to us for tournament prep regarding CDH, because some of our newer listeners might not realize kind of the extensive resumes of some of the people on the podcast. No, myself, I haven't played in a CDH
Some
tournament
of the
in a
people on the
while,
podcast.
so I'm kind of going off of some tournament experience I have. Somewhat in Magic, I have some tournament experience playing like Hearthstone, things like that. But Reed, Morgan, Matt, just take this opportunity to flex.
Dude, I have won 50% of all tournaments I've entered CDH.
Pretty,
he's got
record.
a point.
I do love that. I just want to say I do love to have like everybody else on the bench here in the seats was totally okay with just bypassing that and just doing this episode anyway. And Noob specifically wanted to shill for everybody else.
Yeah,
I mean, we did start this whole podcast off with a flex.
okay, look.
How many wins do you guys have? How many top pod finishes do you guys have? Just spit it out there.
Some
Just
I don't
lost
know.
track at this point.
I actually
So
don't
many.
super remember. I'm in double digits, I think, but
I guess it depends on how big you.
yeah,
like, what
it
counts
also
as a
depends on, like,
tournament.
how large the tournament is.
But definitely, I have a pretty solid number, and then like I don't know, probably 5, I think, and then a few more like top 8 type finishes and.
Yeah, I definitely. So I've won a few CDH tournaments in the Hulk era and sort of like pre-Oracle Hulk era. And then I've been sort of inactive recently, but still entering here and there. And then I have a fair number of top pod finishes as well, along with those.
I think I've scrubbed out in a CDH tournament once.
I scrubbed out once when I got. Like, I fully scrubbed out once when I lost my first game to, I think it was just a bad pairing. But the second game, I had to play 3DH against a mid-power-ish, like, Stacks deck and a Zur deck. And I had to stop the Zur deck from winning because I was playing, like, a blue interactive deck. And then we just got locked under, like, Pain Reflection and, like, just... all these terrible cards, and I was like, I can't stand this.
Hey, you also scrubbed out of the Time Twisted tournament, right?
I guess I did,
Oh,
yeah.
man.
Don't worry, I'm always here to remind
Always
you.
there. Always there to humble me.
Yeah, just how
Keeping my roots.
Flashback to the Canadian Commander Championships.
Oh,
Matt,
my
Morgan, you
goodness.
guys made the
Don't
finals
even
on that, but
remind me.
didn't. Neither of you won
Yeah.
that, correct? Just to
Correct. Yeah, the guy who
no.
opened Land Crypt Skull Clamp Sylvan Library wound up winning that one.
Cool. Yeah. So there's a lot of tournament experience and success on this podcast among the co-hosts. So definitely some. If I was to get advice, if I had to go into the community and get advice from anyone, probably Morgan and Reed and Matt definitely.
This was supposed to be when I was supposed to show my rank stats. God.
See, it's kind of a shame we don't do last names on the podcast, so we can't bring back the round 1 nickname.
Whatever, man.
I do just
No.
sorry. I
No.
will say I think probably my biggest credential in this facet is ending a ranked season on the at the time when the CDH subreddit server was one of the largest gameplay servers, ending 250 elo points above anybody else. Was great.
Yeah. Well, doesn't really have anything to do with tournaments, but the flex, I guess, is always
I
appreciated.
mean, it doesn't
Hey,
not
no,
have
no,
anything to do with tournaments.
It's
I'm
definitely
just trying to make Reed look
competitive
bad.
magic.
Okay. So the next section after the
I mean, if you're 250 points above everyone else, is it really competitive?
oh god, let's be
I mean, it wasn't.
let's
'cause I was
remain
winning.
let's be somewhat humble, guys, please.
It's the flex cast.
Yep.
So next category we have is
Brought
card
this on
choices.
yourself.
London.
Okay, sorry. Okay, we should
Okay,
actually
card
get
choices.
this segue.
Yeah. So
Um,
our first bullet point here is expected hate. So one of you guys let's start running through this.
Well, so okay, so sort of past, I guess before we get into like the super specific stuff here, I'd say for card choices in general, it's sort of just like, first of all, just tweaking your deck and making it fit your playstyle. Like just taking a stock list and running with it, like works, but you're not gonna get the best results with that. And a lot of the like incremental taking percentage points and building up to like performing fairly consistently is whenever you are taking a deck and like taking a newish deck or like a new shell or whatever and playing it in a tournament is making alterations to it to fit your playstyle, right? Because stock lists on whatever the database that people just post to servers, whatever, are going to be either generic lists or they're going to be tuned to their experience or their meta. And you really should, just in general, as a general rule, take those lists, test with them a bit, and then make card swaps to make them closer to what you want to play.
Yeah, I'd say as like all of this is good, but I think it's also important to like exercise all of these things in moderation unless you're like very confident that you know what you're doing. It's sort of easy. It's a similar thing with sideboarding in like other formats where people who are new, like every matchup, they side out like 8 cards and side in 8 cards, and it's like, okay, you should probably be doing like 3 or 4. And it's a similar thing here. Like if you start changing a huge number of things in the deck, assuming it's like reasonably well designed to start with, you can definitely start encountering problems. So, swapping like a couple pieces of interaction, like, oh, I think I'm going to see, more creatures that stop me than enchantments. So like I'm going to, go down on like one piece of artifact or enchantment removal for an extra piece of creature removal, or like for a bounce spell, that's more like generic, even if it's temporary. Things like that, are obviously fine and can definitely help you if you sort of guess right. But when you start taking out like just a whole bunch of cards, then you certainly start to damage the integrity of the deck as it initially existed. And if you're starting from what other people have determined is a good base, that's generally not ideal.
This is a common one for me, or like you kind of used to be, and which is slowly in a meta that's heavily stacked, especially with like blood moons and back to basics, to slowly move my land base over to basic lands. I have found is like a slippery slope where you get to the point where you actually can't consistently cast your spells. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this.
Not that specifically, but yeah, I certainly like
It's sort of, yeah.
have seen some similar stuff where like you start trimming like, I mean, for me, the thing that I always do is I trim cantrips, and it's bad, and I know I shouldn't. And then it's
Never a
like,
good
oh, you
idea,
actually don't have
but-
any of them, and
yeah.
then like your hand, like things just become a lot less smooth.
Like you're now mulliganing to 5 every game because you don't have any consistency pieces. And you're just like, well, I guess I'm just trying to high roll now.
I mean, it's probably not that extreme, but and
But,
that's
you know,
another thing.
You're
Another thing to keep in
increasing,
mind.
like the average mulligans, which is like typically not a good thing.
Yeah, and another thing to keep in mind is that a single card swap is actually very unlikely to make a difference in a given tournament, unless it's like a card that you are very much expecting or want to be able to be tutoring for.
Yeah.
Yeah, the really impactful things can be tutor targets. Like if you're in, I think when Morgan was getting ready for his Get Rog deck for the tournament, we discussed Caustic Caterpillar as a card to potentially put back in if he's concerned about specific artifacts or enchantments, because when you put in a Caustic Caterpillar, when you put in some form of creature-based artifact enchantment removal, you're essentially adding like 10 copies of the card, right, through all the different creature tutors in the deck. So, toolbox cards like that can actually, even though they're a single card swap, can make a big difference. But if you're putting in, the 8th copy of Counterspell versus the 7th copy, not that big of a difference.
Well, I'd say less about counter magic and more about like removal, because it's very rare that you'll be tutoring for counter magic, I feel like. Whereas like the first Swords to Plowshares is a lot better than like the second like creature bound spell or whatever, as like a hard removal piece.
Yeah, definitely.
If you're just like if you're not on any like hard creature removal in your deck and you expect to see creatures, it's going to be very impactful to add like the single copy of Swords rather than just like going up to 3 copies. Like you're going to see
actually,
like fewer marginal returns on it.
Free tip from me to you: put Swords to Plowshares in your deck.
Yeah, so actually, we were.
Maybe we should save that for the current relevant meta, but just do it, okay?
Anyway, I feel like we're probably at a point where we can now get into the expected hate section with like that all out of the way.
Go ahead, read your quotes that you've gotten that you put down.
We're not there yet.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Stop spoiling the surprise. So first of all, we sort of wanted to talk about, I think, how do you actually, beat the expected hate that you're going to see. So once you have this list of it, and it's sort of, okay, maybe we should back up again and go over like how to expect hate, which is a hard thing to answer because we're basically getting down to how do you predict metagames in like any game, which is always a
predicting
difficult
is
thing.
hard,
Yeah,
particularly of the future.
Yeah. So it's hard for us to tell you like it's hard for us to tell you if you ask about this like, well, how am I supposed to like what hate am I supposed to expect, all this stuff, because honestly that's really about your own experience. If we knew exactly how to predict hate, we'd probably also know exactly how to predict the stock market, and we'd be making a lot of money and we'd be making a Magic the Gathering podcast for a very fringe format. So it's really just gut feelings and sort of trying to puzzle out what you think people are going to be playing. And it's a very personal process, I think. I share very little of that when I'm actually, because I feel like it changes from tournament to tournament what I'm actually thinking about, what hate I'm going to see, and how I want to build decks.
And it definitely does. And I mean, sometimes you are just blind. Like you're going into a tournament, in an unknown, like say you were going to like a Grand Prix back when those were a thing, and there was going to be a tournament. I mean, I know they didn't have real CDH tournaments, but if there was one, like realistically, it's very difficult to know what to expect. You're going to get like some people coming in, trying to spike the event with whatever is considered meta decks, probably from an online meta. You're also going to get a bunch of local players who want to like try their hand. You're probably going to get a bunch of mid-power decks who like, joined just to see, what they could do. So like something like that might be very difficult to predict. But that being said, okay, you have, if you have ideas of like what's meta, then you can generally come up with ideas of what's anti-meta. So, like, right now, or during Hulk era, as an example, one of the hate pieces that you could expect to be seeing a lot of was, I mean, anything that hated on Hulk. Usually Grafdigger's Cage and Rest in Peace were, like, the biggest two. So, like, that's, that's reasonably obvious that, like, okay, people are gonna, if Flash Hulk is the boogeyman, people are gonna be bringing things to deal with that. Maybe I should try and avoid collateral damage, like, maybe in a Flash Hulk meta, Razakats isn't, like, the best thing to be doing.
Yes.
But then, like, now maybe you're thinking, okay, usually, like, Grixis-based Turbo Nas type things are the best. So what am I going to be seeing? Well, probably, like, the two things that hate on those are, like, spell limitation effects, so things like Rule of Laws, but also tax effects to a certain extent. So do I have a plan through those? And then also artifact hate. Do I have a plan through that? And maybe ETB hate, but that's certainly, something we haven't seen as much of, even in so-called anti-meta decks. So you can certainly like try and work out what's the most obvious anti-meta stuff you might be facing. You can also look for previous, like there sometimes are data points. For example, I didn't really know what to expect going into the first tier 1 con, but going into the second tier 1 con, I tailored my expectations a little bit based on the first one. And like the decks I faced weren't the same, but some of the things that were overrepresented at the first tier 1 con were overrepresented at the second tier 1 con, which was made up of a lot of the same players, and that was not surprising to me. So if, there have been previous tournaments, or you understand, like, it's a local tournament and you have some experience in the local metagame, you can certainly use all the information that's available to you to make the best guesses you can.
Yeah, I would also say for, like, online tournaments, looking at where the tournament is based out of, usually you'll see online tournaments be associated with a gameplay server, a community server, etc., and they won't just be standalone tournaments. If you have a general idea of what the meta looks like on that server specifically or in that community, that can also be an indication of what you might see going into the tournament. Just, having, like, just prior information, having the idea of, like, what composition of people are going to be entering is sort of a good indicator as well, and you can sort of drag information out of that too. But yeah, it's a whole lot of amalgamating information from a lot of sources and trying to generate some types of assumptions out of it.
If I can offer some advice from my experience playing in TESPA Hearthstone tournaments, one thing, the TESPA tournaments were split into like a round where you needed to win so many games for what I guess it's like a Swiss, and then it would go into like different stages of tournaments. It's Morgan, you guys were talking about picking meta, anti-meta. The thing during the Swiss portion, the first thing you need to do is you need to make it to the next level. And generally what I found, and I'm sure Morgan can, because I played with Morgan in these tournaments, can attest to, is that picking the strongest deck into the wide open meta of Swiss, where it's just super hard to predict, was kind of the best strategy. Going anti-meta and things like that were more things that we would do when we got out of Swiss and we started playing against the more or less cream of the crop players, and that's when we'd start going into the anti-meta strategies. But even when we started going into the anti-meta strategies, it's important not to get too deep into your head about, well, if they're going anti-meta, I've got to go anti-meta, and then it's anti-meta all the way down, right? You don't want that to happen. Really, what I've found is that it's anti-meta is kind of where the buck stops. You can usually get away with just anti-meta being, that's you don't need to go too many layers deep. Just a single layer of targeting what you think the best decks are is generally a pretty good strategy, rule of thumb. And then what's important is if you're not able to switch your decks between some preliminary Swiss round and then day 2, if you've got to stick with the same deck list, make sure that your anti-meta deck can actually win the game, right? Because if you're like, well, everyone's going to be bringing Hulk, so I'm going to bring my super specific anti-Hulk Anafenza deck. Well, if your Anafenza deck can't compete with the kind of random decks that people are bringing, because it's their pet deck or it's the deck they're comfortable with, then you're not going to make day 2. You need to make sure that your deck is individually strong, and then worry about targeting the meta second.
Yeah, and I would say every layer you go deeper, you have to go like one less macro in what you're choosing. So like if you think an anti-meta deck is viable, that's fine. And if you're like looking at anti-meta stuff, that's probably more about card choices, right? Like for as an example, I don't think you should like be picking a deck that's super strong into like Rule of Laws and Artifact Hate. If we assume Rule of Laws and Artifact Hate are like current anti-meta, picking a deck that's super strong into Rule of Laws and Artifact Hate is a bold call, because you might just run into like a triple Turbo Nose pod and then be like, well,
Just sad.
this is not great.
Yeah.
But, for example, maybe that means you want to be putting like a Force of Vigor in your deck. If you're like, okay, there's going to be Turbo Nose, so I'm playing Interaction for that, or I'm playing some sort of like fast deck, but I might have a problem with Rule of Laws and Artifact Hate, maybe that's when you put in a couple extra pieces of permanent removal or whatever, to sort of tech against, like as a hedge, but don't
One thing-
tailor your entire deck to beat it.
Yeah.
Well, the kind of rule that we did a lot in TESPA at least was pick the anti-meta deck, and then you talked about Rule of Laws and stuff. Well, what deck is generally good with Rule of Laws? A Rule of Law deck itself, right? So one thing that you can actually do to give yourself a bit of edge against other people who might decide to go anti-meta is include some cards that help you break the mirror. So when we did TESPA, there was it like Murloc Paladin or something was the best deck, and we ended up putting in I think every single list we submitted had 2 of the Murloc crab eating cards.
For context, just a card that hard counters specifically one other strategy.
Yeah.
But
Literally,
so we were like playing the anti-meta deck that also could try and beat the mirror.
Yeah, and it's sort of like it's all these different layers of do I need to go over the meta deck? Okay, do I also need to go over the other anti-meta deck? Can I do them both at the same time? Is there like a composition of certain card choices that I make to do all of this?
It's not a binary choice.
No.
There isn't just meta and anti-meta, and there are obviously multiple interpretations of anti-meta in itself, but there is, the union of meta and anti-meta isn't the full set of available deck.
Yes. Anyway, I feel like we do have enough background now to go in and talk about expected hate. About talking about our actual topic. So we have a couple of subcategories. One thing that we did want to talk about was the question of how do you beat the hate that you're expecting to see? That's a great question. This could be as simple as my deck doesn't care about the hate that I'm expecting to see, so I beat it by default. Or it can be as horrible as my deck is hard countered by the expected hate that I'm expecting to see, which, first of all, why are you playing that deck? But if you are playing that deck, you now need to figure out like what card swaps you need to make and what your play patterns are going to look like against it. I know Morgan had words about this.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of play patterns in particular, you need to, like, if you are expecting to encounter hate pieces that really do stop you in your tracks, you should have a plan, even if that plan isn't, winning the game in the short term. Having a plan of what you're doing for a couple reasons. First of all, you don't want to be sort of spending your resources in the wrong ways. Like, if you're, some people, they see a hate piece that stops them from winning, and they don't really think about anything else. They just go like, okay, well, I need to find a way to get that out of play. So then, like, they have Demonic Tutor. They're like, well, this is going for Abrupt Decay. That's just what's happening here. And that's definitely not always right. It's good to be able to evaluate, do other people at the table need this out of play? How
urgently do I need this out of play?
How urgently do I need this out of play? Yeah. Is there something else? Like, let's say it's a Rule of Law and you're playing some, Grixis Nas deck. And you go like, well, okay, I don't have this, like, I can't cast Ad Nauseam into a Rule of Law. I mean, you can cast it into a Rule of Law.
You're allowed
it's not
to
a
cast
good
Ad
card.
You
Nauseam.
probably
It's not a
shouldn't.
good card
yeah.
into a Rule of Law. But, like, okay, well, could I find, maybe Hullbreacher is, like, something that I want to be doing here. I think somebody else is going to cast a wheel, or I think maybe even I can set up a wheel. People are tapping low because they're not expecting interaction, or, like, maybe it's not a Rule of Law, it's a Trinisphere, right? And you're like, okay, there's probably going to be an opportunity where I can just end step a Hull Breacher and then play a wheel or something like that. Or maybe I do just go for the Adnos because that other deck at the table, they also need that Rule of Law gone. And they're playing green, so, like, they have a much easier time of
They
getting
have an
out of
Nature's
play.
Claim.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, I'm just gonna, be ready for when it goes away. And the other thing is, you want to know what you're doing when a hate piece comes down, because most tournaments have some sort of round timer, and one of the things that's like very frustrating is a stacks piece comes down, and essentially you have to reevaluate all the capabilities of your deck because you don't really know, like, if you're not super comfortable with all the pieces of your deck, and you just have like a small set of play patterns. When those get disrupted, suddenly, like, it's like there's a rule of law. You can only cast one spell. Why is everyone's turn taking like 2 minutes? Like, it should just be like, okay, draw my card, cast my spell, pass. Like, there's not a lot else to be doing here. And that's definitely like a big thing in tournaments. And then, there's a lot of pressure, like, people will start to like push you to play faster, especially as the round time draws near.
And panic sets in, and
and be vocal about it, like, early. Don't be rude, but certainly, like, it's especially in a situation where time is of the essence, you absolutely need to be vocal about
if
that.
somebody's eating up the clock unnecessarily, it's almost like they're directly affecting your life total in a way, because they're just like directly getting closer and closer to taking points off your plate that you might potentially
they're
need
threatening
to make
your
finals,
win,
right? Like,
Yeah.
they're threatening your win, and, like, that's unfortunate.
they're just like they're creeping a hand toward your chicken nuggies, and you gotta bat him away and get him to go away.
But yeah, I definitely, like, obviously you can't necessarily control what other people do, but you can definitely control what you do. And if even if two of the four players in a pod are playing quickly, usually then, like, they can also, nudge the others into playing at least faster. So as long as you know what you're doing, usually the person who plays the stacks knows what their deck does under the stacks. So, like, then you can sort of hope to allow the game to progress at a more reasonable pace. But it's just something you should be comfortable with. And also because if somebody else starts hurrying you, like, then you start feeling pressure, and then that's when it becomes really easy to make mistakes. So you just want to avoid that situation in general.
Cool. So, I alluded to this earlier, but I think, Reed, time for your quotes that you have written down.
Correct. So the other side of the coin for expected hate that we haven't really talked about yet is the expected lack of hate. So if you don't think that there's going to be some set of hate, maybe in the current meta, you're not particularly expecting to see something like a cursed totem or something like a rest in peace or something like that. Something to that effect.
I was gonna say rest in peace is like
all-time low.
Is so yeah.
Maybe you're not currently expecting to see a blood moon. I know I'm not. Dockside is incredibly good into blood moon, and I don't think a lot of people are willing to play that card right now. There's a quote by Miles Davis that goes, in jazz, it's not the notes you play, it's the notes you don't play. And fantastic quote gets across the exact point that I'm looking at here, which is basically, if you're expecting a lack of a specific type of hate, take a look at your deck and see if there's cards that you can get away with cutting because you're not expecting that hate. So if you have this line that in your deck, this one line that's like, okay, I'm playing this because this deck absolutely needs a way to work through a rest in peace, because otherwise I just can't win through a rest in peace, and I'd rather have the backup win con than have to go for removal and go through my regular win con. If you're not expecting a rest in peace, maybe you can get away with cutting it. Maybe you can get away with cutting your thing that specifically loses to doesn't lose the curse totem, but you wouldn't be playing anyway because you don't really think it's that great. Maybe you can get away with cutting your basic lands because you're not expecting a blood moon. There's all these little choices that you can make to sort of streamline your deck and maybe make room for cards that might suit the meta better, or cards that you can then like strip out and use the card slots for cards that streamline your strategy more.
Yeah, I think, this kind of analysis and making, slight refinements to your deck, making sure you're picking a deck you're comfortable with and you've got play advantage. It all kind of boils down to, I guess is more common with 60 card, where the tournaments are much bigger and you're expected to see multiple people bringing kind of the same, almost exact same list. You've got to figure out how you're going to separate yourself from the pack. Because if let's say you're showing up to a GP and you're bringing standard mono green Tron, and there's a ton of other people who are also bringing the same list. How are you going to get to the day 2? How are you going to get to top 8? Like how is this going to happen for you? Well, it could be slight optimizations in the list. It could be optimizations in play. But you've got to do something that's going to make you step above the rest. Otherwise, it's just kind of dice rolling. So if you're expecting that, you're going to take your Thrasios Tymna list, your stock CST list, what are the choices you can make? As Reed was saying, maybe you can remove some cards to fit in whatever tech you want. You've got to figure out some way to make sure that you can be above the rest of your competition who are bringing the same sort of, or got the same sort of idea as you. And I think that
you had a quote, Lyndon.
What? Did I have a quote?
I'm bringing it. Yep.
Yeah,
right.
Possibly
Fair.
one of the most famous
Okay.
icons.
Yeah.
of ours.
So we've gone through deck choices and card choices. So at this point in the tournament prep stage, you've got your deck list solidified, ideally. And, in the show notes, it's just written down Santa Claus. You've got your list, check it twice.
You might be missing the Imperial Seal or the Passes.
Yeah, Reed, do you want to speak to the importance of checking your list twice?
I don't know what you're talking about. I once didn't play Imperial Seal and won a tournament, so I feel.
And just to check, was that a deliberate choice?
Who knows? He in the moment.
I feel like
when you're building
I
a
feel
list.
like
strictest definition.
Unfortunately, both of the times Rita's done this, like it combined teaches a very
didn't
bad lesson,
matter.
because when he didn't catch the mistake, he won, and when he caught the mistake, he didn't win. So it's just
Okay, also, isn't there like a famous anecdote in like professional Magic where someone some pro player had a list that he forgot like the win con?
LSV was playing a Ant Storm list with Burning Wishes
Oh,
for
Tendrils
in the sideboard as the win condition, and got through I think all of the Swiss rounds of the tournament into day 2 by going off of a Storm turn as usual. For the record, he forgot to put the Tendrils in a sideboard, so he had no win con. He'd go through his normal Storm turn, just completely as normal, cast a Burning Wish, and his opponents would scoop. Just assuming that he had it.
Okay, the way I heard the story, I thought he had Tendrils in the main. And so, like, it was just the Burning Wish wasn't live. But,
Oh, no, I heard it as he just checked in 14 cards in his sideboard.
Yeah.
Either way, yeah, make sure you have the Tendrils in your sideboard.
Make sure you're running the Imperial Seal.
Yeah.
And then I guess the second rule or second takeaway from that story is make sure that your opponent's played out.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
or just show the.
That's the
Yeah,
classic. It's also
if you're going up against a Gitrog player, make sure that they're actually demonstrating the win and not, make sure they know what they're doing and they didn't
also
forget some important card.
That
or
does
whatever.
remind me of a story from the Yu-Gi-Oh days of basically the exact same thing, but when somebody would be at 800 and you have 2 level 4s in play, you just put them on top of each other and say cowboy, win, and then scoop up when you didn't have cowboy in the extra deck.
Oh, that's scummy. Okay, so that wraps it up for deck choices and card choices. And next up, we're on to the current relevant meta. So there's really 2 categories, I guess, to look at, which is the online meta for online tournaments and the local meta for IRL tournaments.
Rest in peace.
Brackets. RIP. Yeah. Hopefully they come back eventually.
So we already
2022, here we go.
I'm just excited for, like, our Australian and New Zealand fans to all comment like, we have local events every Friday.
Yeah.
We get it. Okay. Our stores are open. Must be nice.
So I don't think we can really speak too much for the IRL local tournaments because, as we just pointed out, the current meta for that doesn't really exist.
And even then, before
Online
that,
tournaments.
Also, when it did exist, we kind of
existed,
were the
yeah.
meta, so it's
Yeah.
like, it's a little...
in fact, we
little
didn't
hard
even
to
have EDH tournaments. We had 2v2 tournaments that were
Yeah.
far more popular.
Don't
so-
even. I'm getting sad. Don't bring it up. I miss PV2. I miss PV2. Yeah. So online tournaments, online meta. How do you determine what the relevant meta is, and what is it right now?
It's Grixis, and you determine that by saying Grixis to yourself.
Yeah. Just look at tournament results,
Oh, hey, look, it's
which are
Grixis.
infrequently posted on Reddit, and I'm sure are in plenty of discords. It's a data gathering task for sure.
I mean,
And-
that being said, don't just assume that, like, every, the meta's just, like, an entirely homogenous thing.
Yes.
And that, like, oh, well, if I'm ready for Grixis, I'm ready for everything I'm going to see, because it's only Grixis. I think we've actually seen, at the last tournament, like, we've seen some tournaments that were Grixis dominated, but we've seen some that weren't in recent memory. So, data exists, but definitely take it all with a grain of salt, especially when it's not data being presented, it's someone's interpretation of the data being presented.
Yeah, big time.
And also,
Yeah, look for those assumptions for sure.
So like, I'd say like the two main components, honestly, of trying to determine what a meta is what's the deck to beat, which in current thing is Grixis Plus, and then what's the current spice, which right now I think is stuff like Winota, Magda, some like some Simic stuff of some form or another. Just like the two components, the good thing and the thing that people currently like to play and is spicy and want to get results with.
So, once you've identified that Grixis is the meta, how do you take advantage of that, or how do you use that knowledge to improve your performance in the tournament? So, assuming you've already picked your deck list and let's say it's all right into Grixis, I think there's one kind of important thing, and it's generally something you should do for any deck, not just the most popular decks in the meta, and that's familiarize yourself with the deck lists and how these decks work. One thing that really separates when you're in 60 card and you're going at a GP and you can't. There's some information that happens pregame now that there's like companions and stuff like that, but usually one thing that you should try and do is narrow down, like as soon as you see the first land, and you can get a good idea of what the deck is. That's like a level of knowledge that's going to really going to help you in the tournament. And the same thing is with CDH, except we already know what people are playing when we sit down because we can see their commanders. But what you need to do is you need to understand what the decks are doing.
And what that
Right, so-
means for your current game as well
Yeah.
is the big
I
one.
kind of want to bring this back to deck choice, and you can kind of, kill two birds with one stone. If you aren't necessarily comfortable with the deck, then just practice a bunch of decks, and you'll find both the deck that you're best able to pilot, and also familiarize yourself with the standard deck lists.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
like
sort
if
of-
you can, one thing that I like to do, and when I played, I think it was like a couple of years ago when I was playing a lot of Magic, I was playing with I think Redshift or someone, and I would, whenever someone would tutor for something, I'd basically call out kind of what the tutor target was, and some of that is like a bit of mental trying to mess with people, but if you can kind of narrow down what you think they're going to be able to tutor for because you have such intimate knowledge of the deck and you're able to read the game state, that is very useful. Narrowing down the amount of cards that you potentially need to play around to a select few is very, very useful. and it can, being like, wow, okay, I think, this is a good opportunity for my opponent to tutor up an opposition agent or hull breacher. I should probably hold up my counter spell or removal just in case. If you're under the impression like, well, they just spent this demonic tutor, it could be literally any card in their deck, so I really can't play around anything. You're at a severe disadvantage. So yeah, study the decks, understand what their game plan is, how they're trying to execute it. That way you can best counteract it.
Yeah, I do think though that like at an even more basic level than like making soul reads and like knowing what your opponents are likely to do inside of the game is just like having basic knowledge of like the relevant decks in the format of the staples that they play, so what you can expect them to have access to at any given point in time, the win cons, how they're winning the game, what those win cons can and can't win through, and then the key interaction points. And those three things will really give you the tools to work with to be able to like make proper decisions in really most games. Is just like how the decks function. Great.
Yeah. That being said, I mean, first of all, don't make soul reads, make brain reads. But like, when you think someone's tutoring for something, it should be because you have a logical chain of thought for like, okay, here's the position they're in, here's why this card would be like good. And also evaluate like, you can evaluate potential tutor targets based on their threat to you as well. Like some things, it's like, I don't care if they found this really. The classic is like, they tutored for a toxic deluge and I'm not playing creatures. Like, I don't care. I hope they cast it and like hurt my other opponents or something like that. But I think it's also important, what we're talking about is like ideal tournament prep. So yeah, if you knew every deck you're going to come up against sort of intimately, and you're reading what they're tutoring for, and like are predicting their plays, like yes, that is absolutely going to help you win tournaments. But it's certainly not like necessary. You don't have to like play CEDH like it's a full-time job, and play every archetype and every deck and get reps in with all of them to be able to do well in a tournament. Just like some of the most basic things is probably enough. Like if you know what their win cons are and how to interact with them, and then you have a basic awareness of like some of the most common things not to walk into, like opposition agent and hull breacher. Like, okay, they just tutored and then passed with 3 mana up. Interesting, like that's usually enough to avoid, like a catastrophic
blowout
playing
or
blowout or definitely get the big things down before, the perfect is the enemy of the good. Definitely don't spend all your time like trying to get every single detail memorized perfectly. If you have a basic understanding of what everyone else is doing, that's enough to do decently well.
Cool. So on to the day of the tournament itself. What should we do?
Wear a watch.
Time management is a big one, and that starts by showing up on time.
Now, that being said, remember that at a competitive REL event, and I've taken advantage of this multiple times, as long as you're registered, you only get a match loss 10 minutes after the round start. Your opponent can't go to the judge 5 minutes after round start and say, hey, my opponent's not here, can you get a match loss? They have to wait the 10 minutes. So don't panic. You can get a friend to sign you up and get there late.
But
that
don't
being said,
plan
don't.
for that.
If that's what happens because of, not these days, but like a subway outage or whatever, then yeah.
It's
there to be taken advantage of in reasonable circumstances.
That being said, don't do that. Get there on time. Probably, hopefully, at least half an hour ahead of time. Make sure that you're there. You're set up. Good to go.
Make sure you're there, and then make sure that you show up 9 minutes after the round starts, just to put your opponent on tilt.
Yeah.
For the that
Sorry,
slight psychological advantage.
Just on time.
Yeah. Next,
and then sorry, I have to pile shuffle because I just
And then next we've got be polite, which
This is actually
it's just a good life rule, you know.
Yeah, it's not a bad one to just like when you're interacting, especially when you're interacting with people you don't know. It's like just generally good advice.
Sorry, I thought you were gonna finish that with, especially when you're interacting with other people.
I mean,
Just other
obviously,
humans.
I mean, it feels like that would have been pretty hypocritical.
Yeah, so after you finish your burger, wash your hands
Yeah.
before shoving
Yeah,
it back.
exactly.
Yeah.
Getting the burger grease all over their sleeves. They'll love that.
But like, you know, being polite is definitely the first. Like, it's not the only part of effective communication, but it is a part of effective communication. And certainly, poor communication and sloppiness are things that can have, you know, can make your results worse in more ways than one.
Especially, this is actually a huge difference in CDH versus 60 card. 60 card, you can actually just be like the shittiest person that you would like to be, and it doesn't actually matter because it's really just about the actual play patterns in the game. Your relation to the table at CDH does matter in like a large number of games. And if people think you're just being a dick, or like they have the read on you, or they just don't like you and just don't want you to win, there's a very real chance that
They'll
your shit
spite
just
you.
gets countered. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not even necessarily conscious for a lot of people, but it's just like, you know, when they're making subconscious evaluations of the game state, you don't want to give them any reason to be influenced against you, right?
Yeah.
Like,
So be nice to
ideally,
judge staff too, dude.
Yeah, definitely be nice to judges.
I've been at some GPs where you hear people, you know, calling judges, and it's you almost hear like a disdain in their voice. They're saying it like just be loud, be nice.
I like the ones who call judge like they've been stabbed.
But that's my favorite pastime. That's what I'm gonna get back to as soon as we can go back to GPs.
Or like you walk through GPs and you hear some people just like they're talking with judges, and you're like, oh god, why you could not pay me enough to be a judge at this event.
That's a person.
Yeah, and who would have thought that, you know, 4 Canadians on a podcast would be polite?
Be polite, everyone. Yeah, I know, right?
Judge, please.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess we can move on to, you know, slightly more
game
slightly
relevant.
less, more game
Substantial.
relevant.
This is actually a big one that like I am always a huge proponent for, like 100% of the time, because it's something to like that is very easy to slip on if you're not paying attention to it. But literally just playing tight, don't make snap decisions, and thinking your plays through, because like I truly believe that mechanically tight play, i.e. tapping mana correctly, ordering your plays correctly, like draw first, draw last, omega lol. Just like thinking your plays through, not tutoring prematurely, casting all your stuff in the right order, making sure that you're playing the right lands on the right turns, making sure that
Dude, I feel like you missed the first step, which is just look at the board.
yeah, that too.
Like
Onboard tricks, man. Oh,
just-
God.
like don't even commit to an idea
Because-
if there's an onboard
Yeah,
trick.
mechanically tight play is like really is like one of the easiest things to get sloppy on, but it like actually has one of the hugest effects on your win rate you can imagine, of just like missing simple things, missing the onboard trick, not doing things correctly, realizing halfway around the turn cycle that you're like, oh shit, I didn't really I didn't leave the right mana up, I don't have my double blue for my counter spell, shit. Just like making sure that you're not just making those snap decisions and making just like those minor misplays adds a huge amount to your consistency.
Well, one of the things is that if you look at 60 card, you know, they talk about it all the time. You know, burn players, they just don't have to use their brain a lot, so they don't get fatigued at the end of the day, or at the end of Swiss, right? It's kind of the same in CDH if you're doing a long tournament. If you're playing a deck that you're not familiar with, you have to use a lot more brain power to make sure that you're, you know, upkeeping this tight mechanical play. And it's difficult, you know. It's easy to do it for maybe game 1, game 2, but you know, by the end of the day, it's just you're beat, and you know, it's how you're keeping track of all this stuff. It's very easy to let these simple mistakes slip through. So, you know, it really does. Tight mechanical play starts well before the actual day of the tournament. It starts with being familiar with your deck so that you don't have to think so hard, and it's easier on your brain, and also building good habits.
Oh yeah, during
which is
practice or just casual games, yeah, 100%.
so one thing that and I think a lot of us do is no personal takebacks, right? In games, there's it's like, oh, I fetched incorrectly or I did something. I personally hold myself to a rule of no takebacks because I want to be conscious of my play, right? Because there's no takebacks in tournaments, so
Well,
if you
that's
start
not
treating
exactly true.
okay, but as a general rule, so just don't if you start treating your practice games or your just fun games, don't be like super sweaty and try hard and trying to scum your opponents out of wins or something when there's nothing on the line. But treat it with an air of seriousness as if you're preparing for a tournament. Try and make tight play. Tap your lands. Do tap correctly. Leave the correct mana open. Just do all those micro decisions before. Build them as a habit, and then you're less likely to make those mistakes on the day of the tournament.
Yes.
Yeah, the politeness of your play group isn't a mechanism to play mechanically.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would also say, like, it is important to think your plays through. You don't just sort of want to be like firing things off. But I think one of the most important skills is to think on everyone else's time.
That's a big one.
Because what you don't want to do is like, okay, you saw a game state, you're going around the table, nothing hugely impactful is changing. Okay, someone played a land, they cast a dork or a mana rock, like, okay, this person cast their Thrasios. And then you get to your turn and you draw a card, and it's not a hugely impactful card, and then you start evaluating all the lines of play that are available to you. It's like, okay, really, you could have evaluated 90% of these lines, like, before it got to your turn. And then it's like, okay, oh, I drew Demonic Tutor. Okay, I have to reevaluate. Is there something I can do with this turn that I couldn't do before? It was like, okay, I drew a land and I already had a land in hand. All right, let's execute the plan that I figured out was the best plan, on my opponent's last turn while they were fetching or whatever it was. Because, like, again, you don't need to sort of think, like, you don't need to only start thinking once you have all the information. And the other thing is that from a threat assessment perspective, if you spend a really long time thinking in your main phase, like, in my mind, I go like, okay, they're just short of winning.
Yeah.
Or like they,
100%.
They think that like next turn they can try and win with counterspell backup.
Or they're
like,
evaluating, do I want to go for it right now? Like,
Yeah,
they can
exactly.
win, or they want to sandbag for a bit.
So like,
That being said, if you're deciding between taking a long turn to think about trying to win and then not trying to tip your opponents off, I feel like it's better to lean on take your time, think it through.
right, but I'm saying like
But
if you're
on the
trying to
turns
win,
where
that's
you're
correct. But
not trying to
if
win.
you're not trying to win in the like immediate term, but you still like spend a really long time to evaluate a whole bunch of potential plays that you probably could have evaluated before your turn, it's just going to make your opponents, the ones who are paying attention, are just going to focus on you, and that's definitely something you don't want.
Cool,
And I guess
cool.
this ties in with the next one, which is be mindful of the round timer. CDH tournaments definitely haven't settled on what the round timer should be. A lot of them do 90, some of them do 75.
I've seen a
and
couple with
particularly
60,
on-
which is like, ugh.
Yeah, particularly on 75. If you're not playing quickly and the game is being slowed down by something, it's like very easy to get
It's
into
going
a draw.
to go to time.
Yeah, so, assuming you don't want that, just make sure that you're keeping your play moving along. The occasional nudge to your opponents is not out of order. If they react really negatively, it might be time to call the judge, just to give the nudge for you.
Calling a judge is never explicitly a bad thing.
Yeah,
Never be afraid to call a judge.
yeah.
And next we have announce your plays and be neat with priority.
Yeah, it's
Which being neat with priority, I feel like is as much of a courtesy to you as it is to your pod mates.
Oh yeah, and it also makes it so you don't get into weird fucky situations where like people thought there was pass priority on this ad now, so they start resolving it. It's like, oh, hold up, and they've already flipped like 3 cards, and like now everybody gets JRVs, and then you're around like you get 3 JRVs by the end of the tournament. You're just DQ'd. Like, all right.
Yeah. If you're thinking about a counterspell, at least announce that you're holding priority.
Yeah.
It's not worth the awkwardness of your opponent, thinking that they're demonic tutor resolved and they pick up their deck immediately before you can tell them to stop.
Yeah. And especially when like multiple things are going on the stack and you're passing priority, it's not a bad idea to specify like one of the things that I'll do, for example, let's say there's a Ristic study, right? And someone goes like, I cast ad nauseum, the Ristic study trigger. It gets to me, I'll say like, I pass priority on the Ristic study trigger.
Yep.
So then it's like, it's very clear, right? I'm passing priority on this Ristic study trigger. That doesn't mean I'm letting the ad nauseum resolve. That doesn't mean, like, it means exactly what I said it means. Or if I say like, pass priority, if someone, wasn't really thinking about the Ristic study trigger, they might sort of think like, oh, well, the ad nauseum's on top of the stack. And so it's just like, make sure that if your opponents always know what you're doing, then at the very least, it's not your fault. And you can always ask exactly what your opponents have done if you're not sure.
Yeah. Also, another one.
So it's just something you can control.
Another one with this is announce your targets on counter magic. There's a lot of the time that you'll see counter magic wars happen, and people will just be, okay, I'm gonna cast this ad nauseum, dispel, mental misstep, force of will. Sorry, what are these all targeting now? So that we can actually know when it comes time for somebody to deflecting spot something, or
also
potentially
think
managing
your targets with counter magic as well.
That too. Think about priority order. Just like make sure.
But also,
it's just like
the reason.
Be very clear with your plays and make sure that everything that is happening is fairly explicit when it matters. Obviously, you don't need to be super anal about this when somebody's casting a dork and passing turn, but anything like even slightly of note, especially in a tournament setting, it should be very explicit what is happening.
Yeah, and I would say err on the side of being careful. Like, you can usually say like, okay, I'm gonna crack this fetch. If that's good, I'll find by you. I'll cast Llanowar Elves. If that's good, I'll pass the turn. Like, turn 1. Yes, like that's a very extreme example of things you're probably fine to shortcut, right? When, like, even, people use, like, ad nauseum, or they used to use, like, flash as the example of, like, this spell is on the stack. That means the game, like, if this goes the wrong way, the game's ending here. Maybe ad nauseum is the equivalent of that now. Like, for things in the middle, I would generally err on the side of just assume that it's worth it to be specific. Like,
I'm casting this Ristic study. Great. I'll pass priority.
Yeah.
Priority goes to you next. Okay, you pass priority. You have priority.
Like, things like Ristic study, or wheels, or even like, things down to there, or like, Crom.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm casting Crom.
Yeah, like
I'm casting Tevesh. You have priority.
Yeah, like, theoretically, you might waste a tiny bit of time, but you'll waste a lot more time if you, like, speed through something and then have to rewind, and then...
Yeah.
So definitely only be not neat with priority if you're, like, very confident that this is not, a time when it's going to matter. Like, very, very confident.
Next, we have follow the rules, which is pretty self-explanatory.
Pay for your spells the correct amount.
Yeah, I just want to make a little bit. I just want to like make a serious elaboration, which is just like the players are the rules engine, and the judge. But as long as you kind of all recognize that you need to enforce the rules as a group, then games go twice as fast.
Yeah, and another thing with following the rules is making sure you know the rules. I mean, obviously, you don't want to get penalized for breaking the rules. That goes without saying. But also, making sure you understand the rules means that you don't want to get penalized for not breaking the rules. There are, things that you can know that, people, not even necessarily intentionally, often it's just they don't fully understand the rules, that people will try and, like, call you on. Like Lyndon said, there are no takebacks in tournament Magic. For example, if you say, I play Bayou. Actually, wait, no, I want to play Tropical Island. That is, assuming nobody else said anything, you didn't cast anything, no one did anything, that is extremely legal. And, like, sometimes people will be like, nope, you played it. And, like, I genuinely don't think most of those people believe that you are actually allowed to take it back, and they're just trying to, like, scumbag you. I think they just think there's no takebacks in tournament Magic, and think that you're not allowed to take it back. So, knowing what your rights are, knowing whether or not you've passed priority if something sort of gets rushed over or skipped, knowing when triggers are or are not missed, all of these things will definitely just, add those few percentage points on.
Also, another big one, just to tack on to the don't get got and, like, make sure that you're sort of in a good place to be doing stuff, is, like, any time before you're finished placing a spell onto the stack / like finish the process of casting a spell, you can take it back for the most part. Basically, before you're done paying costs, you do not have to continue paying costs on a spell, and you can just say, oh, whoops, haven't paid the cost yet, this goes back to my hand, which can be very useful for when you say something like, I'm going to force a will that thing, and before you exile a thing, before you announce what you're exiling, somebody else is like, hey, no, don't do that. You could be like, oh, great, I won't do that because I haven't paid costs yet, so I'm going to put this one right back in my hand. And that's a totally legal play that you can do even in, like, competitive REL. And that you're not going to get got by that because now you know that.
Yeah, and also, if you find yourself in a situation where you don't know the rules on something, that's when you call a judge, because it will always be worse if you think you kind of know how this works, and then you do something, and then you call the judge, because it's like, okay, this got weird, and then it's like, sorry, you did what? And then, like, that's when you run into issues. So if you don't know what should happen according to the rules, just call a judge. And usually, if the judge takes a little while getting there, you can get an extension, but just don't haphazardly, oh yeah, we all think it kind of works this way, so we're just going to go with that, because that can definitely go very wrong if, a judge winds up getting called later on.
Kind of in the same line of following the rules is kind of knowing what cards do, knowing the actual rules text on cards.
Oh yeah, reading cards.
That's a much more polite way of putting it than how it's in the show notes. Yeah, RTFC, if
you're familiar with the term.
Yeah, there's plenty of times when, if you're EDH is such a weird format where the amount of cards that you need to know is just insane.
The amount of weird corner cases that we run into in this format between cards is just ridiculous.
Yeah, and we've got lots of shorthands. Someone plays. It's like, here's an example I was just thinking of. Your opponent plays an Allosaur Shepherd. Maybe you've never seen that card before, and you're like, oh, what's that card do? And he's like, okay, well, my green spells can't be countered. This can't be countered. Okay. And you're thinking about maybe removing it or something. And you're like, it's okay, it's fine. Go to his turn, untaps, taps all of his mana, pumps up his things into 5/5s, attacks you for lethal. Well, his description of the card was probably accurate in his mind to what he was thinking, which is what most people are generally concerned with, right? The non-counterable clause. But it does have extra text. And I know, playing Arena and stuff, there's so many cards now that have just infinite text. Questing Beast, I've so many times forgotten that damage can't be prevented. So many times, and I've gotten got by that. You just read the cards, understand what all the cards do. If someone plays a card you're not familiar with, you say, oh, what's that? And they give you a brief description. Just ask to read the card. Just
Yeah,
fully understand the
Oracle
card
text
yourself.
is
Yeah.
not a bad thing. I encountered a situation like that in a tournament not that long ago where there's a bit of a miscommunication on what Mausoleum Secrets did, and it turned out that a win potentially could have been stopped with a Noxious Revival by like Noxious Revivaling a creature so it didn't find the card it needed to find. And like someone did wind up reading the Oracle text, but they were kind of talked over, and the person didn't hear it, and it was just a whole bunch of whatever, you know. And so like just make sure you actually understand what the cards do, not sort of how people have shortcut the cards in their minds.
And yeah, I mean, again, this is sort of another judge thing where never be afraid to call a judge and ask for Oracle text of something in like any situation.
Yeah. Specifically, if your opponent very loosely provides a definition, like
Yeah,
how
or if it's an
Flynn
old
did-
printing and the
framed it.
wording is ambiguous or whatever.
Yeah, make some tokens, kill stuff.
It does a thing.
He's not wrong.
So before we get on to our final section, which is one-off tips, we have a couple more things we want to cover in Day of Tourney, which we have here. We've got have a good breakfast, have a good sleep, do some stretches, do some yoga, whatever, meditate. Here we'll list them all.
Well,
fresh
okay.
pair of
To be
socks.
clear-
Let's list them all, then we'll break them down.
Yeah, don't get those extra pancakes. Just get like a single serving of pancakes.
Charge your phone, have a good shower. Wait. What?
When your phone's charged.
These escalate a little bit.
Call your
Once
parents.
your phone's at
tell them
a
you
good
love
charge,
them.
then just
Have an up-to-date
Make sure you have an
will.
emergency contact.
Make sure you have an emergency contact. Make sure that you have notified your next of kin.
So
That's probably
these
not
things that
necessary.
are just help put you in the right frame of mind. Make sure that you've got enough energy, you're well rested, your brain's functioning. Open a window. I saw this thing where it was like a YouTube video where they were
stale
showing
air.
how,
Yeah, how it
with
decreases-
CO2.
decreases
If the
brain
CO2
function.
level is like even in like bedrooms and stuff, like it gets really high.
Just like any closed
So-
room with that airflow.
Yeah, and your cognitive function goes down like 15 to 20%.
It's actually ridiculous, yeah.
Yeah, open a window, get fresh air, do these things, and just when you're relaxed, calm, fed, not hungry, you don't have anything else going on, you're just gonna
hydrated.
play better. Yeah,
Yeah.
it helps a lot.
Oh, the one for me is always bring chapstick. I get so my lips get so dry during long tournament days that especially at convention centers and stuff, where the air gets super dry. Just like any personal stuff like that. Like if anything is going to annoy you if you don't have it on you, bring it.
Listen to put on your playlist to pump you up before the for your first game. You
While you're
play a
gaming,
nice
just
song to
don't
get
pay
you
attention to anybody else in the pod.
do some air punches.
It's probably not a
before.
bad idea to bring something to do between rounds as well, especially if you're not there with a group of people.
Yeah, okay,
If
Mr.
it's a
Smash
book
Bros.
or
Ultimate on
something
Nintendo
to-
Switch in between
Yeah,
turns
sure.
and
Yeah.
signage. All right.
No, but yeah, these things might seem kind of trivial or like jokes, but no, seriously, it can and will help. Okay, so some other one-off tips. What do we have?
So
Wait, we need some cheesy if you want to be the best player you can be, you have to be the best you can be. There we go. All right.
Wait, did we specifically mention hygiene or just say fresh socks?
We did say
No,
shower.
yeah, fresh socks
but,
and shower. Yeah.
Yeah,
don't
but-
don't be a smelly
deodorant
weirdo.
Even to
probably,
online,
probably a
please.
good idea. Yeah.
Even if it's an online tournament, just
Dude, showering just
put
feels
deodorant
good.
on.
yeah, I
Yeah.
do prefer not to feel completely gross when sitting in front of a screen for 8 hours in a Magic tournament. Anyway, so for some of these one-off tips, so these first few ones are actually just legitimately just come from experience of having been in a bunch of CDH tournaments and seeing the constants between all of them, which are the couple that I have here, and then I think Matt has one as well. But first of all, you're always 100% of the time, always in a CDH tournament, going to be paired against a weird stack stack. It's like playing in any legacy tournament, you're always going to get paired against Death and Taxes, except weirder, 100% weirder.
Someone has
They're
possibility.
going to be playing. It's not even Possibility Storm anymore because that's too mainstream. They're going to be playing some random shit. They're playing a Yixlid Jailer in the main. They're playing 3-mana Thalia. They're playing some new stacks effect from like one of the last 2 sets that you've never seen before, and you have no idea what it does. And it's not good, but it's taking up the mental energy of you having to remember what it does every turn.
What's Keegan's favorite one? It's like Juntu Steaks
Oh god,
or
something
something.
like that. Yeah.
Juntu steaks are
Oh, man.
fire.
Somebody's
you take that.
somebody at the table's
No, but that's-
somebody
yeah,
at the table's
it's
playing
good,
a Meek
but it's
Stone
weird.
or God Pharaoh statue, some shit. There's always going to be someone that you pair against that's playing that shit, so you have to be prepared for that. In fact, for a long time, whenever I was playing a blue list in tourney, I would always put a Psych Rift in it. Even if I never played with Psych Rift in testing or in like on ranked ladders or whatever, there would always be a Psych Rift in the main deck come day of tournament because I knew that it would come in clutch in the weird stacks deck matchup.
You just need to.
Yeah.
You need some way to break through the Ward of Bones lock.
Yes, no, legitimately yes. And actually, that Psych Rift, that single Psych Rift choice has saved my ass so many times in tournament. It's not even funny.
Just put Psych Rift in your deck is honestly not a bad hedge.
It's not.
against
Yeah,
a lot of
it's
things.
pretty
In fact,
okay.
Yeah.
that got upgraded to also putting in a Force of Vigor in my deck whenever I could, because that card is also clutch against any, like, most weird stacks decks.
Yeah, watch out for mana maze.
Yeah, let's continue our Magic tournament situations generator impression. So we've got you're always going to get paired against a frog player. It's going to happen. You should know how to interact with frog.
For the love of God, you should know how to interact with Frog. It's not hard.
The thing, okay. Well, the
Hey
thing
guys,
is that
the Get Right
sometimes
players going to their end step with 8 cards.
there's often a very narrow window when you can interact, and sometimes people are too late.
Yes,
They're like, "Oh,
people
I'm just
miss
gonna
it.
wait till they're doing this thing," and it's like, "You buddy, you missed it."
I'm gonna wait until there's an Eldrazi Titan in the bin. No, you're not. They
Yeah.
have 2. You're dead.
Yeah,
Plays so tight that they become loose again.
that actually happened to me at the tournament. I cast a Summoner's Pact, and then they let it resolve, and then I found a discard outlet, which I then cast, and then I discarded, and they knew I had a dredge card in my hand. Like, I didn't have Dakmor, but I had a dredge card. And then I started, like, dredging. I think it was Life from the Loam, right? I'm, like, dredging Loam. And then I found the Dakmor, and then the person showed me a silence. I was like,
Well, that doesn't work anymore.
cool.
Too late.
Yeah.
Yeah, you certainly cast a silence. That's happening. So yeah, just make sure you interact at the appropriate time.
Yeah, this one's less about being able to interact with Frog. I mean, obviously you should be playing like a removal spell at least, but you don't have to tech against Frog. Just be prepared to know how to interact with it when the time comes. Matt,
Indeed.
And on kind of a similar vein, but you don't actually have to know how to interact. Someone's going to be playing mono red, and someone's going to be playing mono blue.
and you might not get
The
paired
key to
against
stopping
them,
Godo is to counter the
but my
Godo.
God, they're going to be playing them. Actually, Matt, Magda is the new mono red hotness now. I don't know if you knew that. Be prepared.
I get it.
Honestly, I think that Dargo Jeska is actually better than Magda.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the artifact dwarf stuff is like pretty fine for accessibility. Anyway,
What's our next one?
I feel like this is Reed's.
Oh, I put this in. This
is
was a
yours?
super
Okay.
offhand. Yeah. I just said, like, if there is a particularly wild opponent, talk them, because if they go unchecked, they're almost certainly going to be king-making someone else.
Yeah, it's
there's
definitely.
a
politics are your best
66%
friend.
chance they're going to be king making somebody that's not you. So
Yeah, it's certainly like it's fine to like.
it's some weird,
There are-
fucked up Monty Hall problem.
there's like
that
there's
you're
like the
never gonna
whole
win.
the whole. There's a whole joke like never interrupt your opponent when they're making a mistake. It's like that's very much
No.
not true in a 4-player free-for-all environment. Oftentimes you want to interrupt your opponent when they're making a mistake. Like they attempt a win, or like it looks like they're about to attempt a win, and like you're gonna spend your interaction and then you're gonna die to like the next person in the turn cycle. Yeah, ideally they'd like cast their win and not get there, but even more ideally, they don't cast it, because then you don't lose. So don't be afraid to like
Yeah.
manage information in a way that helps your opponents not make decisions that are really bad for both you and them. I'm not going to say the best decisions,
Yep.
because obviously you don't want them to make the best decisions for themselves, but there are often you can
There's
help your
some
opponents make
common
decisions that are
ground,
better for
usually.
you.
And this, kind of comes back to the politeness point too. Don't be a dick about it.
Yeah.
You're just decreasing your chances, at getting the desirable result.
But yeah, like, hey, this person's, cast 2 tutors, like maybe they are going to attempt to win, pointing stuff like that out is it's not a bad idea a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Okay, next.
Another one that almost any tournament player in any card game will tell you is don't change your deck the night before deck submission. I cannot tell you the number of times when I've been up at like 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock playing games, like just jamming games with somebody in some random bedroom somewhere going to like a regional tournament. And I'm just like, you know what? I think I'm going to make this package swap right now. And we're just going to run with it for tomorrow. And just immediately regretted it the next day as soon as I played the first round. Just lock in your deck for like at least a day or like 12 hours before deck submission.
Yeah, go onto Reddit, competitive EDHN, sort by new, and then at 3 a.m. on the night before, just pick the first deck that comes
Yeah,
out.
and take a piece of tech from it, or like,
Yeah.
Whose is this?
no, well, we're skipping.
Oh, we're
I mean,
Well, we already covered.
Yeah.
covered. Bring water and healthy food. Yeah, have a good breakfast. Get
yes,
good sleep.
snacks are definitely
Yeah.
not a bad idea to have lined up.
so this is also mine.
Yeah. Meal trucks are expensive.
Great one off.
Preferably one that's really greasy. That's going to get on your cards and
Oh
stuff.
yeah, for sure. Or like
One that'll get you on your
something
opponent's
with like
cards.
neon orange dust, like Doritos or Cheetos. Just,
Oh yeah, this is mine. So yeah, definitely make sure to bring your best anime waifu matching sleeves and playmat to tilt opponents. The best place to get started with mental warfare is yesterday, but the second best time is now. Just get them.
Yeah, mismatch basics.
Get them tilted early and often.
Yeah.
All foreign
Maximum
cards.
irony.
Yeah, no, dude.
um,
Anything to get the slightest bit of edge.
Oh my
They'll
goodness.
love that.
Okay, actually, I feel like this episode is just my silent pet peeves episode that I missed. But man, like foil sleeves, are you kidding me?
Oh, foil art
Like,
sleeves.
don't do that. Don't do that.
How about new foil art sleeves that?
No,
mean
the
that
trick is
the
you
deck
bring
is
foil
already
sleeves?
sliding apart.
you need foil sleeves and a wedge so you can tilt the reflection right into your opponent's eyes.
Bring a lamp and put it at the
alright,
exact
let's-
right angle.
And the final thing on this list, I wrote respect the mid power deck that will try and beat you to death. So there are and this kind of the broad rule here is just give decks the respect that they deserve, even though you might not think it. So someone plays some fringe CDH deck or some high power deck, you can't just ignore it. They are in the pod and they are going to be doing things in the pod. So do devote some brain power to kind of analyzing what they're doing and realize that, wow, maybe if I'm just answering all these other players, this guy's just got this deck full of mid-range bombs is maybe going to take over the late game if things get stacked out heavily. And you can definitely lose games to someone just playing mid-rangey bombs, and if things have been locked out. So be conscious of how these kinds of decks are going to play into the late game, and give them the respect they deserve. Same thing with like new decks. This tends to happen where something like a Vanifar, when it came out, Morgan, you went on like an 11 game win streak or something, right?
I think it was 9, but yeah.
Yeah, it's people when decks are new and they're obviously not like a top tier Thrasios, Tymna, Nagila kind of whatever. It's not something that's obviously top tier. People tend to discount the decks, and they just kind of sneak by and just get free wins. And you see this happen a lot in tournaments, where you look at the finals pod and you're like, what the heck is going on here? Right? Why is there all this random crap? And a lot of times it's kind of an unassuming deck that can sneak under the radar, because people just don't respect it, and a lot of the other decks are kind of just canceling each other out. So yeah.
Honestly, those pilots are usually generally the more prepared ones. Which is kind of funny. Like,
Yeah.
if they, like, I would find myself spooked by some off-meta confident person playing a deck like, more than anyone else.
Absolutely. Okay. That wraps it up for our advice. Does anyone have anything they want to add before we move on?
Yeah. Enter tournaments. I know we're kind of making it sound intimidating. And
But these are all
the first tournament you enter, you'll probably make some of these mistakes. I certainly know that I did. But tournaments are hella fun, and more people should attend them, and just give it a try, and, learn from your mistakes.
Also,
if you make...
these are all
I'll say when you make
these
them,
are all these are
and
all,
I don't mean that in a negative
these
way.
are all tips for like trying to win a tournament, and like most CDH tournaments honestly are free to enter, so you don't even need to be really trying to win. So don't really like be that worried about making these mistakes. Just enter, have fun.
He's just trying to psych you so that he can scout.
Oh, yeah,
that
100%.
Yeah.
Free
Don't worry
wins.
about winning, because Reed will take care of
Yeah.
that for you.
Don't worry about that.
But if you really want to win,
Yeah. Also,
bring good snacks.
important advice: if you're in a tournament and you see Morgan or Reed, they die first. It's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
And if you see me and Morgan in the same pot,
think
Morgan
they're-
dies first.
I think they're trying to make a
Yeah,
section
Reed
of,
needs all the help he can get.
comprehensive rules for that.
No. I need us to be on equal ground after I kill myself with a Nadnaz.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's time for everyone's favorite segment, Gut Check.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Is that a gut?
Gut check. Also, Reed,
Thank
you're not
you
allowed
as
to whisper.
always for bringing the energy, Morgan.
Reed, you're not allowed to whisper. That totally.
It wasn't a
steals
whisper.
my
It was an
thing.
ASMR.
Okay, that's even worse. That's just not allowed in
Morgan,
general.
Morgan has full creative control over the
It's-
decibels of.
Yeah, exactly. Just roast that part.
Any gut check vocalization below minus 30 decibels is trademarked by Morgan.
Exactly.
Okay. So this week's Gut Check is, who is your favorite MTG pro? Or I guess I don't want to say like personality, because I don't want just like YouTube content creators or whatever.
Somebody
but
who has like
someone
real
who's like
results.
known for playing tournaments, because mine isn't necessarily like MPL or whatever. But
Yeah,
okay.
I got mine.
Let me know when you guys are ready.
Okay,
Good?
I have an answer, and I'm gonna come up with a second answer
Yeah.
for when you guys reject my first answer.
Nice.
Okay. I want to give mine first in case someone was trying to steal mine. So
Wow.
mine is gonna be Gregory Hatch.
You son of a bitch.
Was that Morgan? Was that yours?
Yeah, that was the one that I thought people would reject.
Yeah, dude. Gregory Hatch. Oh god, I love watching his old videos. He's got a great video on, or there's a video of him against. He's playing his famous mono blue martyr deck against
God, I love
Mud. And I've seen that video so many
so
times.
good. The commentary
So many
is
times.
fantastic on it.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of other ones, and there's one video where he's giving a deck tech on his
Artificer's
art of
Intuition
intuition.
combo.
Oh man, it's so good. Yeah, Gregory Hatch, hands down my favorite Magic player. Okay, who's next?
Honestly, mine's easy. I'm not like attached to any particular pro,
that's
but
the one.
I certainly respect the deck decisions of Reduke. But he does unfortunately sometimes tap permanents counterclockwise.
Tragic. I will say, in the vein of Greg Hatch because of that highlight, I do want to say that I really respect Jerry Thompson, whatever.
Jerry.
For the gameplay clip from SCG with the Hypergenesis versus Elves games, the Hypergenesis versus Elves match in Legacy.
I haven't seen that one.
It's from 2013. It is quite possibly some of the funniest Magic I've ever watched. Where in the second two games, both players are keeping hands of like triple Craterhoof, 2 Emrakul's, no lands, no ways to make mana. Because they're literally, he's hypergenesising, and they're just both putting in permanents until the other person is dead. I think the 3rd game starts with neither player making a land drop for 3 turns. It is fantastic.
Yeah, I like his podcast. He's got a great Magic podcast covers like modern and standard and all that stuff.
That being said, I will say that my favorite quote-unquote pro is Caleb Durward. He has some great results. I'm pretty sure he's the highest for the unofficial Magic ELO project. I think he's the highest ranked sealed player of all time, ELO-wise, for tournaments. And he also pretty much single-handedly got Survival of the Fittest banned in Legacy, which I think is just great.
Yeah, that's definitely a trophy.
Nice. Okay, Morgan, who is your non-Gregory Hatch Magic Pro?
I guess I mean, it's kind of a boring answer, but I'm definitely a big fan of PV. He's just been so consistent for so long in so many different ways that I definitely respect.
He just started a YouTube channel.
He did? Oh, I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, you should check it out. It's really, really useful, very informative.
Also, I feel like, okay, for those who aren't sure, Paulo Vito Damo de Rosa, because PV is like, definitely you lose a lot of information when you shorten that name.
PVDDR.
Dude, yeah. Paulo Vito.
Like LSV is like, yeah, okay. That's all of his names and all in order, whereas like PV you're dropping still like 3 more.
Cool. So that about wraps it up for this episode. If you guys would like to reach out to us with any questions, comments, or concerns, you can contact us on Twitter at IntoNorthPod, via our email, intonorthpodcast@gmail.com, or on our Discord server, the invite link for which can be found in the description for this episode. An extra special thanks to all of our patrons who help cover the expenses for our show and allow us to work towards improving the quality of the podcast. If you too would like to become a patron, we are at patreon.com/IntoNorthPodcast. Another way you can support us is via our TCG Player affiliate link. So anytime you want to purchase something from TCG Player, if you use our affiliate link, which is in the podcast/YouTube description, a portion of your purchase goes towards supporting the podcast. Thank you as always to the band Vox Cadre for our lovely podcast music, to Nate Slover for our equally lovely podcast logo, and to our video editor, Manta Ray Hat. The next episode will be out in 2 weeks. Until then, see ya.
Bye. Peace.
Have a good one.